What's up, guys? Me, Jay. I'm joined by Kendall, and thank you all for checking out this edition of our Loki episode recap, review, and discussion. Today, we'll be talking about episode 3, Lamentis. Kendall, this was an interesting episode given the massive ramifications of what we saw from the previous episode and what the directors and everybody decided to do with this one. I think was in some ways a little bit surprising, but there were some pretty big important details revealed in this episode and some landmark moments in this episode. So, some of the tea leaves that were left regarding the ramifications of what this means for the timeline and what happened last episode were kind of left for bear this week. But nonetheless, there were some other details that we did learn that were, again, I would say, important and also momentous in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, this was an interesting episode. Like you said, different than the first two in a lot of ways. Probably will be different than the next three that we see, but it had some moments that, like you said, that were interesting. Some moments that really worked, and I think I think the thing that shined the most was Tom Hiddleston's chemistry with Sophia DiMartino. But we'll dive into that as we get into this episode. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was a solid episode in its own right. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that and I guess we can start right there. I feel like with this episode, this was very much a character growth, character building episode here, and in some ways, I'll be honest. Like I was a little disappointed because one of the last things I said in last week's episode review was this was one of those episodes where like I couldn't wait for a week. I needed to see it immediately. So they kind of pulled the rug out from under me in a way that should have been more. I should have realized. Like I feel like at the end of the day, I shouldn't have been surprised. Like oftentimes we have a big momentous episode, the next one's a lot more of a slowdown, so to speak. To kind of rev you up for whatever the ramifications were from the previous episode. I didn't necessarily expect it. In some ways, this episode starts with kind of tricking you, where you see Sylvie, who we now know her name is Sylvie. We'll get to that in a moment. We see them, her in the TVA, taking out guards in the TVA, and trying to find the timekeepers, and then again the rug kind of gets pulled out from you because we don't get that confrontation because they are sent to this planet or this moon rather of Lamentis that we are then sent to. So Kendall, I guess let's start there. What were your thoughts on that opening scene with Sylvie taking out those guards? And I think to me, establishing, we already knew she could fight, but then establishing that even without her powers, obviously, when she tried to enchant the man and she couldn't because in the TVA no one has those powers, she was still able to do quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, it's very interesting because obviously action has been probably the thing this show has probably lacked the most.
Yeah,
and it hasn't really affected the quality of the series, but that's been one of the few things that they haven't really focused on so far. So to see that, start out with and there were a lot of moments in this episode where there was a lot of action, probably the most action packed episode that we've had so far. And so the scene starts you off, gets you ready for the entire episode in that regard. I also thought it was interesting because coming off of last week's episode, I think last week's episode was certainly the most confusing in terms of what all was happening, compared to this week and the first episode. But the end of last week's episode a lot of us didn't really know what actually happened. And I interpreted it as Loki was going to join with Lady Loki, and it seemed like that was not nearly as clear cut as it was made to seem at the end of the last one. Like Loki was on the same path, he was on the same page. Like, yeah, I thought we could join together. She was like, "What are you talking about? Like, that's not what this is about. Like, why are you following me, basically?"
Yeah, I guess I didn't get to watch it this week, but I did watch the episode a second time. I actually almost want a third watch because, and to be fair, I actually didn't finish the second episode, so the part that would have helped me with this, I didn't get to. But I guess that last scene where Sylvie goes into that portal again,
Chasing down Loki.
Yeah, like the way it's interpreted, it does feel like it's kind of more of an invitation rather than like she clearly doesn't want anything to do with him. Like that
Yeah.
was kind of interesting, and I wonder if that
Because
was
why did
just
the portal
my
close
bad
after
reading
Loki got
or
in?
right was it just yeah, it made it seem like this was like her olive branch to him, and that once he went through it would close, but that it sounded now it looks like it was just luck, like the way that's the
Yeah,
way.
and the way that the TVA was, Mobius is yelling out like, don't go or whatever, and he goes anyway. It was kind of like, oh, so I guess Loki is turning his back on the TVA now, and he's back to
And to
evil
be
Loki.
fair, maybe that was Mobius and the TVA's interpretation of it.
Interpret. Yeah,
Yeah, and if
and
we are looking at it from their perspective, then maybe that was also the artistic decision that
and
was made with that part of the episode.
and then it becomes funny when Loki realizes that there was clearly a mix of signals there from all perspectives, the viewers, him, everybody. Um, it's funny how then he goes back to, all right, now I'm a TVA agent. I'm hunting you down like the mission, like the mission was, like you're gonna come and surrender or whatever. So I thought that was an interesting way to start off the episode because it kind of added more confusion from the end of the last week's episode where I thought I had it figured out, but in fact I didn't. But it was necessary because
And,
the end of last week's episode was quite confusing.
and one of the things we didn't quite get to in the last episode, but was kind of reminded was brought up again in the preview for this episode, which kind of brought us right into this, was that that TVA agent that Sylvie had taken, she gave up where the timekeepers were,
Yes.
which was a big deal. And we see in the very beginning of this episode how that process was was difficult for Sylvie. She opens up about it herself later on in the episode, and we see that she's with this girl in a bar, and you would have thought that maybe it was a flashback scene. Like I assumed it was the enchantment, but part of me was like, well, maybe did she know this person somehow, or whatever. And then we find out eventually that was the enchantment that was happening, and it's through those conversations, the changing restaurants at times where she tells her about going through the golden elevators, and that's where she looks to stop him, and that's when when she gets to those elevators, that's when she's met by Renslayer, who seems at that point to realize, okay, I have to now get involved, and this is elevated to a level that she can't ignore at this point. And Renslayer, I guess, seems to be a much higher level than anybody else. What did you make of just that aspect of it? Like, just we'll get into, I think, maybe a little bit later what we learn about these TVA agents from Sylvie, but just Renslayer coming in, stepping in at that moment in time to get to her before she got to those elevators.
I mean, it was interesting. I mean, I think Renslayer's role in all of this, um, a lot of it has to be discussed. I think even more so in relation to what we learn about the TVA later in the episode. So,
yeah, sure.
I don't know, like her point of view. I don't know what her point of view of this whole ordeal is. I mean, I find it interesting. I always pay way more attention to the previously on any TV series than I probably should, because I think it gives you it really, I think, as opposed to even recapping it, I think it also is the show, foreshadowing and telling you what to pay attention for. What you're going to see in this episode. Everything you're going to see in this episode is going to be something typically that's related to what you saw on the previously on section. And when in that previously on this week, they also showed a lot of the Time Masters, or the Timekeepers, I should say. Particularly the middle one. They continue to focus on the middle one, and they show him, or they show it in the previously on intro. So I keep going back to that. I mean, we have our idea that it probably is on some level connected to Kang the Conqueror.
Yeah.
And the fact that they keep harping on that, and Renslayer and what is her role in all of this, I think it's very interesting. So I'll table the conversation, at least from my perspective, on Renslayer until we get deeper into what we learned about the TVA.
So through that interaction with Loki, who then tries to run down Sylvie, and then they're both tracked down by Renslayer. Eventually, Loki gets his hands rather on the temp pad and sends them off. And what was interesting was, I don't know how you felt about it, Kendall, but when I first watched it, I thought they were sent to some place in the TVA, like they were sent into like some like utility closet or something. But then it becomes clear that they're totally in a different time and planet, and that's where we see that they're in Lamentis, which Sylvie kind of freaks out about because her, being the person who knows about all the apocalypses because she's been hiding in them, she's like, this is a place where this moon that we're on is gonna be slammed into by the planet, and everybody here dies in 2077.
Lamentis won.
So Lamentis won. We know there was questions. I think this is the place that people were thinking may have been Vormir. We know that is not Vormir, even though they had the purple kind of.
Do we know that this is that place?
Do we know that this? Oh,
because I don't know if the shot that people were looking at was in this episode.
It wasn't, but like watching, that's an interesting.
It could have been cut.
Right, and to me, like, I guess the way I watched it, and I guess we'll get to the end of the episode. Like, I assume that like there's still some more. They'll still spend some more time on the planet, and I felt like a lot of like those like asteroid things that they were watching from wherever they were in that shot in the trailer. It looked like the asteroid shots that we saw.
That's fair.
Throughout the whole thing, so I assume that this is that place. But I could be wrong. But I assume that that's what that was, and then the purple lighting, we now know, had a much deeper meaning to it, given what's revealed in this episode. So now it's really at this point kind of just becomes a kind of a buddy cop team up kind of deal with Sylvie and Loki. They kind of split time fighting and then musing about how they could join forces, and then fighting again, and then musing how they could join forces. I tell you what, I agree. I think that their chemistry in this episode was really, in their dialogue, really, I thought it carried the episode. An episode that you could argue really didn't move the story as far along as maybe a lot of people would have hoped. I just think that the sheer strength in the performance from those two actors, I think, carried the way for a lot of this.
Absolutely. There was, I mean, look, casting. It's clear that they went into this, and I don't know. I don't know what the casting process for this role was, but I feel like the priority, I have to imagine, just based off of the chemistry, I don't think it was luck. I think the priority for them in this casting, decision was down to finding an actress that would play off of Tom Hiddleston perfectly and be able to almost replicate and play a similar character, because that's what she's playing. It's supposed to be a variant of Loki. I mean, they couldn't have done a better job, I don't think. So, yeah, I mean, it really popped off the screen. I mean, the show continues to have incredible dialogue, whether it's Hiddleston and Mobius, whether it's Hiddleston and Lady Loki. Yeah. This continues to that continues to be, I think, the real strength of this, the true strength of this series.
So let's stay on the Lady Loki part of this, because that was a big part of our conversation last week. Is this even Lady Loki, or is this Enchantress?
Enchantress, yes.
I feel like there was probably a little more evidence to suggest that this is a Lady Loki that has taken, in her words, we learn a little bit about her in this episode. I mean, she talks about how she still refused to want to be called Loki. But when she tells her name is Sylvie and he asks why, she says it's an alias that she's gone by. If you play it straight, it seems like, okay, this is a Loki who just decided they don't want anything to do with being called Loki, and they're calling themselves Sylvie. And of course, as we talked about a lot last week, there's a Sylvie in the comic books who's also Enchantress. So if you're playing it straight, it just seems more like, okay, it's a nod to Enchantress, and she has enchantment-like powers. But I'm still not 100% convinced that this still is Loki. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like every time there's a chance to just kind of put it to bed, I just feel like she never does, because she always emphasizes, I'm not Loki, don't ever call me that. There are instances where she kind of acknowledges relation to Loki, but it just still seems a bit off. And sorry, go ahead. I know you went.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I at this point, I think that what they're doing is they're taking two characters that are typically separate in the comics, and I think they're just making them one.
Right.
Yeah, I think that this is some sort of amalgamation of both the Lady Loki character and Enchantress.
It's the Sylvie
Uh,
Enchantress. Right.
the powers very similar to Enchantress. They keep calling it enchantment powers. I don't think that's um, an ironic or a coincidental choice of words.
Do you find it
Uh,
interesting though that she mentions how she taught herself these powers? Loki says I was taught my powers. Like I didn't learn. I didn't just know them or
yeah,
learn them. Like I mean, we all know there are variants. There's some differences, but there are some
yeah,
aspects to like the to me what I think would be essential or the essence of the person being very different. Especially
yeah.
if you're talking
How
about
she
a
knew that
Loki
she was
who,
adopted,
right?
and Loki didn't for a long time.
Yeah,
Like they've definitely carved out that there are big differences between the characters. Um, and I don't. I mean, again, it's not out of the question that they are different. They are completely different characters. But
mm-hmm.
I just feel like they've already. I feel like it's been established at this point, and it could be confusing to some people if you start, you start going back and forth about who she is as a character. Um, I think eventually they will call her Enchantress in this show,
Mm.
and she'll still be who she is, and her origin will still be her origin. But going forward in the MCU, which I think should, I think this is, I don't think it's the last series we'll see this character in, or the last time we'll see her in the MCU. Um, I think going forward she will be the Enchantress, but
Do you
her origin will still have been her origin.
do you think that? So you think that that she is indeed a variant of Loki? There's not anything. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think again, I feel like if we believe they're playing it straight, I feel like that's definitely what we saw. I think that there was a little bit done to kind of make it a little more open ended. So I'm still withholding judgment. I'm definitely leaning towards you're probably more right. But again, her insistence to never be called Loki still is weird to me. It could just be a character quirk. But there's just something there that I just find off. And again, there are moments where it seems like she is willing to acknowledge it, like saying, "Oh yeah, I knew I was adopted. You don't know, or whatever." But then there are other instances where she's not willing to acknowledge that they're the same, which is, again, it could just be a quirk
And
of her character.
don't these shows very much pick and choose when they want to play it straight or not. I mean, we said
Yeah,
with WandaVision, like, the Agnes thing was absolutely them not playing it straight. Like that they were doing a bit, and
yeah,
we figured it out. In episode 1, this is probably what they're doing. Versus the Pietro thing was they were playing it straight. Like, for the most part, we knew. I mean, we knew it wasn't. It wasn't the Fox X-Men Quicksilver, which is what people thought it would have been. So I mean, this show with Mobius, as we saw later in the episode with the whole jet ski thing and stuff. I mean, we don't know
yeah,
for a fact, but it seems as if they weren't playing it straight in terms of his whole origin and whatnot, and the whole
yeah.
TVA stories. But with this character, I don't know. You're right. This could be another example of that, where they're telling us one thing and it ends up being something completely different. But I'm gonna guess right now that they're being honest about what this character is.
And I think you're probably right on about that. This whole adventure that these two are on stems from uh, in their tussle and fighting, their issue with the understanding that the tempad is dead and that it has no power. Like once Loki sent them to this planet, it has no power. So now they're on this planet with only 12 hours to live, trying to find a power source to charge this tempad. They end up going to some essentially a trailer where a woman was there, who was basically waiting for the smoke, ready for the smoke. She went by Patrice. She blasts Sylvie out of the doorway, and then when Loki tries to play his tricks and act like she's her late husband, he gets blasted out of the doorway. Not too shortly afterwards, after she says, "Oh, my husband was never that nice to me." Do you think there's anything to that woman Patrice or anything, or was that just you think that just was like a random
No,
funny
that was a funny
thing?
gag.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a funny gag. I mean, I mean, I think they do a really good job of like taking what I mean. Because look, at the end of the day, it's a Loki show, and like if you would have asked me 3 years ago or even 10 years ago, what would you want out of a Loki series? Or what would you expect? I would expect a lot of Loki doing a lot of tricks and a lot of mischief and a lot of things of that nature. And that was an example of that in this in this episode.
Yeah.
Was him trying to. That's vintage Loki there.
And it was
They
funny
just
because like you see them both arguing about how like what would be the right thing to do, but like what they both decided to do was like, and that happens twice, is exactly what Loki also would have done. Like, would
yeah
Loki go in knives ready and just stab whoever was in there and kill them and get whatever they needed? Of course he would.
yeah
Or they would. Would Loki also maybe trick them into thinking that they were their friend or someone to get close? Of course he would. Like in some
yeah
ways, like they both are the same person and things like that. Where they're arguing about like what are our differences, but it tells you
yeah
like our idea of Loki and how he's been presented to us is very fluid. No pun intended.
yeah
Given the gender fluidity, like he could do all these things, or they could do all these things. So it's not surprising that either of them had these very different approaches, but they still felt like, oh yeah, well Loki would still do that as well. And to see them both arguing about like throughout the whole episode, which which way is the best way to go about it, and it continues on to where Patrice sends them to the end of the town where the the last trains that are headed to the Ark, which never makes it out off the moon, is like I guess basically a rescue vessel is sending people out. They go out there and again, once again, kind of right on cue. Like they both have very different approaches for how they want to go about it. Like Sylvie wants to use her enchantment powers to get on, and Loki wants to trick them into getting on. And guess what? They both end up having to use both of their powers for it to work. Like Loki's trickery got them to the door, but to get into the door, they needed Enchantress or Sylvie's enchantment powers to get it done. And had they flipped the other way around, it might not have worked the way it did. So again, I just thought these were, it was just a really nice, just like kind of character examination of Loki. And if you look at it from
yeah
Sylvie's perspective, and if you do believe they're playing straight, and that this is also a version of Loki, I thought it was very unique to kind of see these different parts of them.
yeah. I mean the entire sequence, pretty much after, maybe pretty much by the time they get on Lamentis 1, that entire sequence of them on Lamentis 1, which is the rest of the episode, really feels like almost like an episode of The Mandalorian, like, or an episode of
Yeah.
like Star Wars, The Clone Wars. Like it's
That
just very,
Mandalorian is a very good
yeah, you
comparison. I
definitely
agree with
feel
that.
some of that, in terms of the humor, like the banter.
Yeah,
It's very slow, kind of,
yeah,
them methodical, but still an adventure aspect to it. And so it was very interesting how they did it. But yeah, no, I mean, it was interesting to see the similarities in both of their approaches as Lokis, and they're, like you said, them being similar and yet different in many ways. It was funny.
and to steal Loki's term though, he says the one thing about every Loki is that there should always be independence, authority, and style. That is, according to him, what makes a Loki. Sylvie disagreed and says, "I am nothing like you." So again, it was a lot of really good lines. This show is really well written. Shout out to Bisha
Michael
K.
Walken.
Ali, who
Oh, she wrote, yeah,
she wrote this
she wrote
episode.
this. Yeah,
Yeah, Katie Heron's been directing all these episodes. She's been doing a killer job throughout. And as we're on this vessel, which we kind of see there, okay, we heard one guy saying, oh, they're letting the rich people on only, whatever. And you kind of see the class people that are on there. They definitely seem to be a lot more well off, very comfortable. They seem to think, oh no, we'll be fine. And they go through this, kind of chat after they eventually get on. And I think the biggest thing from this episode, I think that goes kind of beyond the realm of uh, whatever the story is being told with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was the conversation regarding romance and love with Sylvie and Loki. And it's in this moment where it is revealed that the Loki character that we've seen throughout the MCU is bisexual. Sylvie, when Loki asks him about romance, or I forgot who initiated the conversation. It might have been Sylvie, but Sylvie eventually asks Loki, "Is there, a Prince Charming for him waiting for him after, or no, a princess waiting for him after this, since he's a prince, or another prince himself?" And he said a bit of both. And they kind of both for several minutes kind of go on this thing about love and it being difficult and tricky, but the larger theme is that confirming indeed that this is a bisexual character that we're dealing with. Earlier in the season, they had established, at least the TV in the TVA's mind, they view him as gender fluid, which was also revealed earlier in the season. So there's a lot of important LGBTQ kind of moments happening in this series. Kendall, I guess how did you kind of take these scenes? By the way, when I mentioned the color earlier, the whole episode, but especially those scenes in the vessel, but the whole episode is shot in this hue of like a very purple, blue, red color, and those are the colors, official colors of the bisexual colors, So the whole lighting about everything, it all kind of made sense, and when you had that scene come out, it all kind of came together.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely interesting. The character, historically in the comics, you can write him in a bunch of different ways. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a nice little Easter egg for them to put in there. And this is, this is one of their bigger characters. Obviously, doing a whole series about him.
Yes, exactly.
This is not them throwing an Easter egg of a random character in the background.
Yeah, it's not Joe Russo, in Avengers Endgame,
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? It is Joe, right? He was in it, or it wasn't Anthony? I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah,
it wasn't one of the Russos, who's not actual, character that matters really. Who he actually is gay. That wasn't it was an actual major character who's been in the canon for a long time. He's been in the canon almost since the beginning. I mean, Thor is the third movie in the Marvel landscape if we don't include Incredible Hulk, or it's the second even, right?
Yeah. If you don't include Incredible Hulk, then it's second, I believe.
Second, right? Yeah. So I mean, this is a character that's has a very long history here, and to give him that that representation, and that's why I see it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think that it's important to kind of keep it in that perspective. One, there's plenty of canon where Loki is bisexual. In the Marvel comics, that's very prevalent, and it's not like it's like, oh, last year, like this, goes back several years at this point. So that makes sense. And again, we talk about representation. We talk about it on our pod all the time, whether it be black heroes, or changing races and things like that. Like, it's important to elevate the characters that you do have canon based in underrepresented groups. And we know Marvel has struggled with the LGBTQ representation throughout their stories, and it's been an issue that they've had for a while. And I think some people have kind of argued that, oh, this episode didn't do a lot or mean a lot. It's like, yeah, but it did mean a lot, though. Because, I mean, Marvel has a big LGBTQ community, just like most major popular media, So I think that it was great for them to recognize that, acknowledge that. And I think they did it in a pretty, I don't know, I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community, so I don't want to speak for them at all. But it seemed like they did it in a really tasteful way. But it was a big moment. It was a moment that we have not seen in a Marvel movie or show yet, where one of their actual main characters identified and came out as a member of the LGBTQ community. So I thought it was an important moment, and I thought it was very well acted by both actors, and it kind of just was a nice still before kind of more of the chaos kind of ensued. It was almost very much like a break from the kind of constant moving and running that we saw for a lot of this episode. But the episode then continued with Sylvie waking up after eventually they decide to get some rest. Neither of them wanted to sleep or do anything because they both were awaiting being backstabbed any moment. So they're like, no, I'm keeping my eyes on you. And like, well, I'm keeping my eyes on you. Eventually Sylvie does go to sleep, and Loki doesn't run off or do anything. He's it seems like a good old time. He's maybe too good of a time. Sylvie feels like he got drunk. He's singing with the people, and she seems to even be kind of like what's the word? I mean, enchantment was the word I kind of was thinking about. But she definitely seems to at least be kind of warm to this side of Loki that she had not quite seen, and perhaps it's a side that, given her very much like straight edge focus on like executing this plan, that she hasn't been able to show at all. So that all happened before, of course, they were made because Loki was acting too much like a fool on the vessel, and they eventually had to fight off some more guards before they're thrown off the train. But what did you think of just those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the entire, I mean, look, first of all, it's very funny. Obviously the scenes of Loki, kind of losing it. He's in the variant jacket. He's back in the variant jacket.
Yeah, he don't care about this costume.
He doesn't know what's going on.
He's talking about love as being a dagger, and his euphemisms don't make any sense. Like,
yeah, he did the whole Thor thing where he smashes the glass, yells another.
Yeah.
So yeah,
true Asgardian.
Nice
True Asgardian. He may originally be from Jotunheim, but his home is Asgard.
Yeah, nice little Easter eggs throughout this episode. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this episode was about character development. And a lot of it was about the interaction between the characters. I think we saw some good action there when their whole thing gets blown up, and both of them have to kind of throw down. I think that continued from the original, from the first scene where we see some action with Sylvie and Loki. We continue that on that train sequence.
Yeah, exactly. And in that train sequence, while again they do crack some more heads, eventually Loki gets thrown off the train, and Sylvie, knowing that he has the temp pad, and she doesn't want him out of her sights, just jumps out of the thing too to follow him, regardless of the situation. That shows you how dire that is. She didn't care about getting on that vessel as long as she didn't have temp pad. So, while Loki was thrown off and fell off the train, we learned that the temp pad is now damaged to, it seems like, no repair, which obviously is problematic and a problem for them because they have now very little time to get off this dying moon that is about to be crushed into a million pieces. So after Sylvie kind of blows up at him, and they have their little kind of just like, once again, another kind of, they act like siblings, if you really want to call it 100. I saw someone say they're almost like twins in a way, and that's kind of how they're acting about this whole episode. They eventually decide, okay, well, we gotta still get to this arc, because at the very least, if we can just get this arc off this planet, perhaps we can buy us some time to at least fix this thing at some point. So they get on their way to the arc. We learn, I think, maybe, I would argue, I definitely feel like the Loki being established as bisexual was the most important thing to happen in this episode. But I think the most important thing in regards to the MCU storyline in this episode, I think, happened in this walk to the arc, where Sylvie is kind of talking to him after Loki kind of says, "Look, I've told you a lot about myself, and I still don't feel like I know a lot about you." And they start with one, how her enchantment powers work, and she explains it as she simply makes contact with folks and grabs their mind. For the people that are, weak or not as strong as her, it's very easy to then get them to do whatever she wants them to do. For the people that are stronger, she has to create fantasies from their memories to keep the connection solid, which is what we saw in the beginning of the episode with the TVA agent. She says that she's in control of these moments, but the person is still there, so they still have to be occupied. Which is interesting because when they go further into that conversation, she mentions that TSA soldier's mind had been, quote, messed up, I believe the words were she used, and that she had to grab memories from hundreds of years prior in order to create the environment necessary to get the information that she needed, which was curious to me, one, because, okay, 100 years ago, now, to Loki who's been, or to Sylvie, who's been running around millenniums and different time periods. I mean, maybe 100 years, or it could still be contemporary times, because it seemed like when she was in that enchantment period in the beginning episode, it looked like they were in a contemporary restaurant. It didn't look like it was something from 1940s or whatever, or the 1800s. So that was kind of weird wording, but that just could be her kind of not having a sense of time. But maybe the more important part of that was that, when Loki's like, wait, what do you mean you went back in time before she was a soldier? Because she says there was nothing to take from as a soldier. So she had been a soldier for hundreds of years. She had to go back in time to find something that wasn't her being a soldier. He said, well, these people are regular people. This is the person that was on Earth. This is a human. And Loki says, well, the timekeepers told me that the TVA told me that all these people
Yeah, the
were
TVA agents don't know that.
right. TVA.
They
Yeah,
don't
first
know
of all,
that.
TVAs don't
Yeah,
know that, and also
it's
I was
for
told
Mobius.
that
Yeah,
they were created by the timekeepers.
yeah,
So Sylvie said that's ridiculous. That in fact all these TVA soldiers and agents are all variants. So
yeah.
that's a major big deal because again we kind of surmised this a little bit in the last episode about you know they seem to act like normal people except
Mobius has
for
the jet ski infatuation.
right.
We really don't know where that came from, and
Yeah.
that was I mentioned last week a scene that seemed pretty much out of place, uh, unless it meant something other, unless it had some foreshadowing effect, and that's it was foreshadowing. It was leading up to this, I believe.
So I guess what do you feel like that means now moving forward with this reveal? I mean,
It,
because to me, I feel like now a lot of these characters, I mean, particularly the Mobius character, I mean, I feel like that person could be anybody. Like Owen Wilson being picked to play Mobius, he's playing a character that is very much very Owen Wilson. Like it's a great role.
he's
Like he's
playing
doing a great
himself,
job.
yeah.
Right. In some ways, he's playing himself. It's a little bit of a character casting or typecasting rather. But and he is Owen Wilson. You would think, okay, someone of his star stature maybe would garner a much bigger role. I'm very curious about whether or not this Mobius is some Marvel character that uh, is a hero or a villain. Maybe, who knows that that will then be introduced to and say, well, the real person version of this person is actually somebody. I'm not going to throw up a name, but I feel like it could be someone major given his star stature.
Yeah, I mean that's what's so incredible about this. You know, I mean, I didn't even think about the Mobius aspect of it because I mean, you're right. He could be playing, he could be playing Nova for all we know. He could
Yeah,
be playing,
Nova. So I thought about. I mean, I don't
you
think
know,
this is the person, but I mean, Norman Osborn. Like, I mean, it could be
yeah,
anybody. You know?
yeah, exactly. But I was thinking even more so like just going forward in this series, we we could see other TVA agents that we don't even realize. Like, oh, this is a variant of like a Marvel character that we know or a Marvel character that we've seen. This is a variant of you know Tony Stark, or
Yeah.
this is a
I mean,
variant of
and
Clint Barton.
as we've seen with Loki. I mean, there's a person who is a female. Like they look
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
different.
yeah,
So you say,
exactly.
oh, it's a different actor, but I mean, they could say, oh, but somehow this is a variant of this person for whatever reason. You could make,
Yeah,
someone Owen Wilson. Maybe it's not Owen Wilson, but maybe it's someone else who's that same person. Like you
yeah,
could do this. Really the possibilities are endless there.
yeah. I think what I think it sets up for the future of this series is that again, I go back to Renslayer's character, and that conversation that she had with Mobius last episode, where Mobius talks about how he's never met the Timekeepers. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. I mean, he knows what he's been told, but he's never actually been face to face with them.
Yeah.
And how she kind of acts as this messenger, this middleman for what the Timekeepers are thinking, and it all seems suspicious. And like, what does she know? Like, that's the thing about Renslayer is she a someone who is a TV agent that doesn't know anything that's going on, or does she know the entire game that's being played? I've leaned towards she probably knows what's going on.
I do too.
She's like maybe the only one that knows what's going on, along with the timekeepers or the timekeeper, if there's only one.
Right. And I mean, she's the only person who seems to be, at least among the people we've been introduced to, who has had any interaction with the timekeepers.
From what we know, yeah, exactly. So
You know,
that's what makes her a prime suspect, to be somebody that knows what's going on, and which is why she was so alert when everything broke down at the end of the last episode, and she it's even more of a priority than even the TV agents realize from her perspective, because she's like, I don't want this entire facade to fall apart. Um, I'm leaning that her and Kang are working in league, and that this whole TVA thing is a farce to try and try and further Kang's agenda. I don't know what Kang's agenda is, if you're gonna ask me, but whatever Kang's agenda is, that they're working in league to try and further that, and that there really are no timekeepers. That the timekeepers
wow.
are, or that they are. If there are timekeepers, like it's only Kang. I don't think there are three. So yeah, no, and I feel like
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like that this. I mean, to me, the main question we asked last week was, and you kind of the one who were raising it more was that, are do we just assume the TVA is a good and just like organization, or is there something nefarious going on? I mean, I think there's no question something nefarious is going on. We know that almost confirmed now. You got TVAs who don't know they're humans, and they're actually variants. You know, it makes you wonder like what were their plans with Loki, or at least what's Mobius's plans with Loki? Does he even know? Like, does he even like? I mean, it just opens up so much because like, does he even know that he's like doing this to make him maybe also a TVA agent at some point? Like, with or what is their end game with Loki? What is his?
I feel like this also confirms that, not confirms, but I think this also suggests that they were going to do the same thing to Loki, that they were going to wipe him and turn him into a TVA agent. You know, we know.
I mean, there's a good chance. I don't like we assume those people who get like zapped, they get like we assume they get disappeared or whatever. I mean, who's to say they don't just get sent somewhere to then be
reconditioned?
Yeah, you know, like we assume they're dead, but we don't really know that. That's just what they say is happening.
Yeah.
And who's to say that they don't, that the TVA agents don't know that? I mean, who's to say that they are zapping people and not like they think that they're killing them, but maybe they're actually being just rebooted. Like, it's all up in the air now.
I mean, our mom, in talking with her about this series, she made a great point about how does the one guy in the office not know about what he didn't know what a fish was,
right?
You know, and yet Mobius knows about jet skis. Like that, it doesn't match up unless they're all just coming from different timelines and their minds are wiped, and I don't know.
Right. Because I mean, maybe that guy is from like, you know,
like maybe he's
10,000 BC, and like
exactly
like fish wasn't a word, like, you know, like
it wasn't a concept,
right, or maybe he's from the way far in the future where the fish are extinct. Like again, it's like literally it could be anything, or he's from another planet. Like again, that's also possible. So there aren't fish. So yeah, man, that was a you know, again, this episode didn't do much in terms of the implications for the timeline, but I do feel like that moment of learning that all these people are variants, and now we know they haven't even been told
that'll really
that's a big deal.
I feel like I think is gonna happen is Loki is going to get the TVA agents to turn on the TVA. You know, kind of.
I think so too.
And I also wonder if Loki, on some level, is going to use the enchantment powers that he's learned from Enchantress or whoever, Sylvie. You know, like that'll be something that I don't think that whole sequence of her kind of explaining her powers. Again, it seemed kind of small potatoes, but I think that was also foreshadowing for Loki, kind of picking her brain and kind of knowing, you know, he might use that. He may use it on her.
Maybe use it on Mobius, maybe.
Mobius, it seems like a prime candidate.
Or Renslayer would be a prime candidate too, to learn what's going on. Like, yeah, I think that I agree. I think that definitely could have been a moment to set up something with him using those powers at some point. But yeah, mega moment again. I think, you know, besides Loki coming out as bisexual, the biggest moment in this episode for sure. But they get to the Ark, and it's chaos. The Ark City kind of reminds me of Madripoor, but just in like complete chaos, like just like the lighting and everything, like the neon and everything. It feels like it would have been in Madripoor had it not been about to be blown up. But they get to the Ark, and once again they're met by more guards, and again, once again showing how strong they are. They mow down these people fairly easily. But once they get to the wall, once they realize that they can't go through the main entrance, they had to go around, literally around the entrance to get in. Once they get to the point where they're right there, they look up and they see the Ark get destroyed by an asteroid. And essentially, now not just the people and Loki and Sylvie are distraught, but like even the guards, because they're assuming they're gonna get on at some point. They're all like, "Oh man, this is it. That was our last chance to get off this. It's over." And Sylvie just walks away, which I just think is the funniest reaction and a funny way to end the episode. While Loki's still standing there like, did that really just happen? It was a very like abrupt way to end the episode, but it was a good ending. Yeah,
Yeah.
They roll credits right after that. It was an abrupt end, but a good end. What did you think? What did you make of how they finished this episode?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, the action that was it might have been the most action packed sequence
Definitely.
of the series. You know, it almost like I don't know, it almost reminded me of like John Wick or something. Where
I was gonna say, it reminded me of a Captain America movie, like what we saw from Winter
right,
Soldier or something like that.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely a gut punch. You know, because that was their whole plan was to get to that thing and it destroys. You know, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, it's a crazy concept that they're going to this place where a planet is about to dry. It's about to. You know, it's an
Yeah.
apocalyptic situation. And they're going there right beforehand. But yeah, it was weird. Definitely a weird way to end it because we don't know, what happens. You know, it almost feels like they cut it. Like, I mean, the show is probably cut similarly to a movie in some aspect, and
Hmm.
for them to, I feel like they're gonna get off the planet
It's
somehow
like they cut it within
in the
like an
middle of the
arc.
scene. Yeah,
Yeah, or like within an arc even. It was like this arc
yeah,
wasn't complete. Like we don't know.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
it's like less than a cliffhanger. It's like, okay, well, we know something big is gonna happen. Like
Yeah,
this situation has not been resolved at
yeah.
all.
We don't even know where they're leading into. Like the last
Right.
one, we knew where we were going. We didn't know
Right.
where we were going, but we knew we were going somewhere with those two characters. Now we
Yeah.
don't really know. Where they're kind of stuck. Where they're, there hasn't been much progression. So
Yeah.
that'll be the thing that we we'll have to lead into going into next week's episode.
Before we get into the scores for this episode, were you frustrated as I was with the lack? And we didn't talk. I know I mentioned it earlier, but we didn't really comment on it yet. Like the lack of progress in regards to the storyline with the timeline and the imminent doom of it. Like that scene. Like I guess to me, if I had a criticism, I do feel like this is a fun adventure, but they presented such imminent doom that I kind of felt like this really took me out of like what was most important.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, we'll get to the score in terms of my overall feelings on the episode, but was not was not necessarily a fan of the direction they chose to go in.
Hmm.
Um, this episode is similar to the Match Report episode where they're kind of off the beaten path or kind of in a new environment. But
Yeah.
what really worked, what that episode was aided by was the fact that they got on the Match Report and then they got out by the end, and then they're leading
It's
you
true.
to something completely different, which was them in Latvia. And
Yes.
then we know where that led to. But um, this episode did not get you off the planet. And I feel like I don't know what the story is. Maybe next week there will be a great explanation for why they chose not to. But
I have a
I
theory,
feel
by
like
the way.
all right, but and
Which
yeah, I'm excited.
a
I'm
theory.
excited
It's
to
a
hear your
theory
theory.
discussion, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But that to me, that decision was interesting. It would not have made the same decision. I agree. I wasn't even thinking as much as in terms of what they had set up last week. Just there's only 6 episodes, so to
Yeah.
have an episode where you kind of stagnate, it's similar to the WandaVision episode 4, where they kind of take a flashback and they kind of get you out of it. But I feel like we needed that with WandaVision because
Right.
the way the WandaVision series started, you needed to kind of reset. Where all right, I'm asking the questions: who are all these people? Where are we? What's going on? Versus, I wasn't really asking any of these questions that they gave me in this series, or in this episode. Um, so yeah, just to answer your question.
Yeah. I
What's your
mean,
what's your theory on what's going on?
my theory is even though they failed spectacularly in trying to not die, basically, I think what's gonna happen is because Sylvie screws up the timeline so bad that this timeline is gonna be altered like in live time.
Right.
So I don't know what that means, but
They
I think
they
that
assume that there's
I
gonna
think
be
that
impending doom, but it won't be.
yes, but there won't be. I think Sylvie saved the timeline by altering the timeline the way she did. I
Right.
think there's a chance they may have went to a timeline that has been altered,
Right.
or that is
That's interesting.
that's about to be altered at any moment. Like I'm almost certain. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
So
But I'll
if
go
you're
on
right,
I'm
which I
going to
think
say
that
that
that is
that's what's going to
actually
happen.
Right. That is a good guess. And if you're right, then I feel like I mean, look, the show is called Loki, but it's kind of trickery, to be like to leave it off as if like, oh, yeah, because at the end of the day, like they ended it as if, oh, well, I guess they lost at the end of the show,
I guess the
and
only
we know
reason
they're
why,
not.
yeah,
We know that there's 3 more episodes, so it's like, I mean, I'm not really sweating about how they're gonna get off. I'm trying to ask why, and if it ends up being, oh yeah, I guess we're not gonna die. That would end up feeling like, why wouldn't you just show me that at the end of this episode? You know?
I think the reason why I would be okay with it if they went that route is because I feel like it would tie back to the larger issue at hand, which is the
The big thing.
timeline situation. So that's why I think that this would make sense because they got to tie us back to that somehow, and it's
Yeah,
got to be a way that makes sense that isn't crazy corny or just kind of you writing yourself out of. In some ways, you could say maybe this is yourself writing yourself out of a hole, but I think that they dug this hole on purpose to kind of illustrate just how drastic the move that we saw last week, how drastic it is, how much it could change things.
yeah,
So I'm leaning towards that's what we will see next week. That there may be I think the moment again where you see them sitting down looking at the destruction. I think there'll be a chance that we'll see some of that. But right before anything imminent happens with them and their demise, something will be altered that will be because the timeline's out of control and they haven't gotten to this point to save it.
yeah. I've never been a fan of the whole impending doom storyline for a series when it's like episode 3, because I mean, I know that the stakes aren't as
You
high
got
as
three
they
more
make them
episodes,
out to
so
be.
yeah.
So that always, that's why, look, it didn't kill the episode, but I would have ended it with them getting off somehow. Because now,
Yeah.
like, I'm not even that like excited to see how they get off
Or
right now.
if that's the case, I probably would have ended it with us seeing somehow that this was nothing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That,
You
that
know.
that's how you end it, and then it's like, oh well, I guess we're them realizing that, and maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, last week's episode, the end of last week's episode wasn't what I thought it was.
That's
So
true.
maybe this week's, maybe we find out, oh, she walked off because she realized, oh, we're still alive. We should be dead by now. You
That's
know.
true too.
So I
Yeah,
don't.
because we see them looking at the sky. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. I didn't think about that. So let's get to scores. Loki, episode 3. What are you giving this episode, Lamentis?
I'll go 7 out of 10. I thought that this was not as good as the first 2 episodes. It's a little slow, with not a whole lot of progression, and it was shorter than the other 2 by, I believe, like 10 minutes, which made the
The
cutoff,
abrupt ending feel more
yeah, the
abrupt.
abrupt ending
Yeah.
feel abrupt. But there were some great moments, and I think when you talk about, that again, that chemistry between Loki and Enchantress, I think it does set up, and I think the performances by the 2 stars really did a good job of making this an episode that was still enjoyable in a lot of ways. But um, it's just, given where we are in the show, again, maybe they wanted to wind down, and it's not gonna be a referendum on the series that this episode didn't. I didn't see Thanos in this episode, but it ended up, it was still a good episode, but I would say not as strong as the first 2.
Yeah, I don't know. I forgot what I gave the first episode for a score. But regardless, I'll give this a 7 as well. I was leaning 6.5. I'll give it a 7, and I'm boosting it some because I thought the moment obviously of Loki being established by sexual, that's a major moment, and that's a very big deal, and that was important to a lot of people. So that was a big deal in this episode. And the strength of Sophia DiMartino, really seeing her performance now in full, not in one scene from the last episode, and seeing who this character is and what she's about. I enjoyed the hell out of her. These shows we've seen, whether it be Falcon and Winter Soldier, whether it be what's it called, WandaVision. You see these ancillary characters that are introduced that you see, okay, these people have a future in the MCU. I feel like the Sylvie character absolutely has a future in the MCU. And again, if that's what these shows supposed to be about, I'll be very excited to see, assuming Sylvie makes it out of all of this, to see that character pop up at some point.
The
It'll be great for the fans. It'll be a great moment, and I wouldn't be able, I can't wait for that to happen.
the exec the executives at Marvel, man. You know, I know a lot of people when they cast somebody that's not John Krasinski as Reed Richards, they're gonna lose their minds and they're gonna
Yeah,
say Kevin Feige doesn't know what he's doing. But the executives at Marvel have a really good feel for how to cast a character, man,
they do.
and how to cast a character that makes sense. I think about Catherine Hahn as Agatha Harkness. Do you think about DiMartino now as this Lady Loki character? Couldn't I mean these are characters that we didn't know we even wanted to see because we didn't
Yeah,
really know that they were even in it or what kind of role they were going to play or who they were going to be. And now, I mean, we're only
they're,
three
yeah,
episodes
they're
into
so well
Loki.
cast that you can't even imagine someone else playing these roles.
You can't imagine someone else playing them, and you came into Loki to see Tom Hiddleston. You came into WandaVision to see Wanda and Vision. And
Yeah,
now we'll likely end up leaving those two series talking about when are we going to see Agatha Harkness?
yeah,
When are we going to see Billy and Tommy again? When are we going to see this Lady Loki character again?
yeah. And with
Like
Falcon Winter Soldier, I know this is a character we already saw, but in some ways, when are we gonna see the Dora Milaje?
Io.
Io. When are we gonna see Io again?
Yeah. When are we
When
going
we
to
gonna see
see
Torres again?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
You know,
yeah, Torres. So Joaquin Torres. I mean, these are questions that again, we didn't realize we were even going to ask. We didn't know these series were going to be about these characters, and they're not necessarily about these characters, but they're so well done that you want to end up seeing more of them anyway. So yeah, that's why I'm not sweating about the casting of Reed Richards, about the casting of Wolverine, Professor
yeah.
X. These are big questions that people want to know. I'm pretty sure they're going to get it right.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. But that's gonna do it for this edition of our Loki episode recap, review, and discussion. Make sure you guys let us know what you thought about this episode. What will you give it as a score? What did you make of some of the major moments of this episode? What do you think of some of the theories that we surmised about in this discussion? Make sure you guys leave a comment. If you like this video, make sure you give us a like, and of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel New Generation Media, where we'll have Loki recaps every week. If you're a basketball fan, we have plenty of NBA draft coverage coming up. So lots of great stuff happening on New Generation Media right now. So make sure you keep it locked in here. That'll do it for now. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.